I would really like to talk to you about today's startups, especially failure of startups, success of startups, and what's the difference between both of these. The founders' methods that they use. You done some businesses. You had some successes. I'm assuming you also had some failures. Yeah, tell me, what are you guys doing now, right now?
So I started my second company, FSCM Labs, in November or July of 2019, and then I sold it in November of 2021 to Arise. And so right now we've
nice, congratulations.
Oh, thanks, man. We finished the integration, and now we're kind of rocking and rolling with the business, kind of growing the business, helping to drive value. I think in this macroeconomic environment, everybody's looking for a more cost-effective way to deliver high quality when it comes to services. So that's what we're doing now. We focus mostly on gaming and then also consulting. So gaming, we do game testing, player support, community moderation, and then consulting. We have a set of offerings where we offer to like any vertical where we can help them to transform their business, whether it's AI, cost transformation, a variety of different types of things. We have a maturity model that I invented that helps companies turn their customer service center into profit center. So that's kind of what I've been up to now. I'm working with the Rise.
Oh, that's very interesting. Gaming is it's a up and coming. It's changing a lot. I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago. They're trying to tokenize the gaming, I think gamers. So the time of your gaming. So if you played a game, you probably heard about this. Like if you played a game for years and years and years and you accumulate all this stuff in the game, they're tokenizing that and trying to turn that into real estate. I thought that was a very interesting concept.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with video games, mobile, console, PC in the past is the IP and the license for the assets that you earn in the game or purchased. Even though you earn them, like you played the game hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, they're only licensed to you. It's not your game. And so with the blockchain, you have the ability to actually, those assets in the games, whether they're tokens or whether they're NFTs or whatever they are, they become yours. So you actually playing thousands of hours and earning this thing, these things, you create a way for you to monetize. And then it's called a secondary or tertiary markets, where then you can then trade those with other players, either for cryptocurrency, for cash, or for other assets. That's kind of where the future of gaming is heading. And in some of the games that even I've played, you can trade those in for virtual real estate and so forth. There's a wonderful game I play right now called Upland, which I love. And they have like virtual real estate across the entire globe where you can actually buy the parcels, the actual parcels that exist in the real world. You can buy them in the virtual world and so forth. I think I own like 30 parcels in San Francisco and so forth. So and then you can build buildings on it and trees and all that kind of stuff. But that's the same kind of concept of what you're talking about.
Interesting. Real estate in a game. Well, people can't afford real estate these days, so you might as well buy something in a game.
Well, I mean, the other cool thing about doing real estate in a game is if you own that real estate in the virtual, we'll just call it, for lack of a better term, metaverse world, then you can charge a fee for people to travel through your part of the world. So, like, people will like buy bridges and buy real estate around those bridges in these games, so then they can charge a fee for anybody that wants to pass through their territory. Say it's a shortcut in the game to get to another asset that they need to earn to get whatever milestone they want to get in the game. And so it's a really clever way for people to monetize, their real estate in the game beyond just holding it and eventually selling it later for a better value.
Right.
It's like passive.
But the thing I don't understand about buying real estate in a game is, like, you can create more real estate. Well, like in real world, you can create more land.
So the developers can create more land, right? And so then it's very interesting because it's the same economy. So in a normal game today, let's say you're playing a fighter game like Marvel Contest of Champions on the mobile, right? So what they do is they introduce a new hero or a new champion every month. And they have to be careful about what type of attributes they give that champion so that it doesn't become too powerful, it's not too weak, and it also doesn't get to the point where everybody wants that hero and they don't want other champions or heroes in the game, because you could ruin the economy of the game. And what that means is people will start spending less money on the entire game and more money on an acute part of the game. And so people or developers, when they build these virtual worlds, they have to be thoughtful about that too. Like, hey, yeah, we could always add more real estate to the game, but then we could jeopardize, the real estate, the relationship that we have with the, say, million players in the game that already has assets, right? And I don't know if you've ever heard of the term boycott, but it's a real thing in gaming. Players will get together and boycott a game and stop spending if they feel like the developer isn't paying attention to their needs and making sure the players are having a good experience. And so I think developers are very cognizant of that, not only in games in the past, but when they build the games with real estate or tokenization and so forth. It's all about the economy, because if the economy tanks, it's just like the Dow is down 300 points today, right? If the economy tanks, it has a real world impact on the publisher themselves, but on the players and which players play their game for the long term. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. Do you think there's incentives to gaming companies to tokenize gamers? For example,
yeah, definitely.
To me, gaming's supposed to be about gaming's supposed to be fun. It shouldn't be a job that I'm doing to earn money, because that's basically where it's going.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on your mindset, right? So I think there's always going to be, so we have 3.3 billion people that play games every day across the world, right? And so there's always going to be a subsection of those gamers that just do it for the love of the game. I just want to play games. I don't care about all this money-making thing, And there's going to be, it's just like YouTube. You have people that go on YouTube. They may create their own channel, but they're not worried about monetizing their channel. They're posting things every now and again. They're like, oh, I love that video, or I do this how-to video. I consume content in a certain way, but they don't care about making money. There's always going to be those gamers that just want to play because they like to be entertained. They enjoy the experience. They like the IP, the challenge, whatever, right? But then you're going to have, and we've started to see this over the last kind of 5 years, you're going to have people that are super interested in making gaming a career. So esports is a great example of this. Like, hey, I want to play video games and be the best in the world so that I can make money and make this my career so I don't have to have a day job. There's going to be other people who say, hey, I'm a speculator, I'm an investor. So as more of these games get tokenized, I'm going to spend all of my time being a speculator investor in these games. Whether I play the games or don't play the games is irrelevant, because I'll own assets in the games, because part of the games you'll be able to buy things, and part of the games you have to play to earn them, right? And so there's always going to be that component of the people too. And then there's this third demographic, which is like, hey, I love to play games, and I want to do it as like a secondary income. So like I want to keep my main job, but if I'm playing 2 hours a night, I might as well make a little bit of extra dough for playing, right? And so I think those are the three types of players that you'll probably have kind of going into the future. But I like 3.3 billion. There's probably going to be 2.5 billion that are just going to be playing the games because they love playing games. And then you're just going to start to see other demographics come up to monetize. It's very similar to like YouTube, TikTok, like all of these media and content channels, because gaming is a content play, right? And so it's just like that.
All right. How did you get into startup? Why aren't you doing a 9-to-5 job like everybody else?
Well, it's interesting. So I've always been, I wouldn't classify myself as a startup person. It was never my thing coming out of college. I kind of cut my teeth in the call center, and then I got a job at Microsoft, in the early days. And for the longest time, I was in corporate America. I was like, hey, I like this 9-to-5 or 9-to-6 or whatever kind of security piece. About 10 years into that, I was like, hey, on the side, let me try the startup. And I tried the startup. It's called Blue Newt Sports. Me and my buddy had this idea, like, hey, sports simulation is the future. So we need to create a sports simulation engine. We need to build a website. We need to build the teams. We need to build the whole ecosystem. And so we did all that. but we ran out of money before we could get to market. And we just didn't have the juice to continue. No investors at that time, 10, 13, 15 years ago, were interested in sports simulation. Now there's like lots of companies that are doing sports simulation and making, pretty good money on it. But I learned a lot of things, in that time, about how to start up a company, how not to start up a company. Lots of good lessons, failures. I love the Nelson Mandela quote: "I never lose, I only win or learn." So then I kept okay, I don't want to go do a startup right now because I just had this learning experience. So let me stay with corporate America. So I stayed about another 7 years or so, and I just got frustrated with some of the constraints that exist in these larger, well-organized companies, right? And my wife was like, "Hey, why don't you go start up a company again?" And I had a good friend of mine, Kevin Chu, visionary, and he said, "Hey, man, you've got this idea to spin out a Forte, which is where I was at. Why don't you go build the future of service, build, a global network of talent that's on demand. It's kind of like the AWS of human capital. Here's some money, go make it happen." And so that's what I did. And it was the right time in the market. And within 2 months, we were profitable. And then, 2 years later, we sold the company, for, 20, 30x of the original investment, right? And so I took all the lessons that I learned in the first startup, and then I learned even more lessons in the second startup. But it was a really successful experience. It was I always like to call it my second PhD. My first one was the first. My first one was the first.
Which one was harder, first one or the second one?
The second one. The second one was harder.
Second one was harder.
It was harder because you actually, once you have success, then you're like, well, how do I scale the success? It's not easy to have initial success. So I don't want to over dramatize that. But once you do have the success, you're like, oh, this is cool. But what would be even cooler is if I could 10x this or 100x this. Now
you have expectations because you sold the first one. Now you got to beat the first one. I see what you mean.
Yeah. So it's okay, how do I drive more value? How do I help people even more? And so it was harder to do that and harder to figure that out. And also, I learned because, the first startup never got off the ground, right? It kind of failed before it went to the market, but I had gone to the market. And then I took another offering to the market. So I took 3 offerings to the market. And so you learn what doesn't work, what does work. And, and so it was a super interesting experience. And then also selling the company and then integrating the company and then scaling the new company inside of a larger company. That's been an incredible learning experience as well.
Nice. I know a lot of people that have somewhat good ideas. Do you think people should get into startups? How should they get into a startup? If somebody has a good idea, they think at least it's a good idea.
Well, I think...
Do you think it's a good idea to get into startups and quit your job?
I don't think there's a black and white answer on that one. I think that generally the 3 litmus tests that I try to encourage people to think about is this good idea or a great idea you have? Is it an idea that is going to differentiate in the market? And if you really feel hey, this is really something the market needs, it's different, I can differentiate with this, I can really see this being successful. Then the second thing that I tend to encourage people to do is, okay, then take your idea to 10 of your trusted advisors that are not going to be biased to be telling you to go do something. They're going to be people that are going to be objective. Maybe you pick some people that are close that'll give you certain piece of feedback. Then you go talk to some VCs informally. VCs always love to hear ideas, right? So you talk to them informally, and then maybe you talk to people that are in the industry that, you maybe don't share your ideas, so you don't give it away, but you kind of interview them and you see what the pain points are and so forth. And once you've done that second thing, you're okay, this is still really something I think that can be successful. Then what I say is, what are your skill sets? What are you really good at? And can you find a co-founder that complements those skill sets? Because you need to have a really strong, what's called a T-shaped employee, somebody that's really good in a domain, but can kind of spread across many disciplines. So if you get 2 people that are really good at certain domains and that you're both T-shaped, that's when you get to the point of hey, let me build out the business case and see if I should go to market with this. And then once you've done that, if you build the business case out and you feel really good about it, and you can get that initial seed investment, then I say, why not? Go after it. I mean, everybody's personal life experiences are different. Like if you have $1 million in credit card debt or something else, and you got to be careful, right? If you have a family to take care of with 9 kids or 5 kids, and you're the breadwinner in the family, you have to think about those things, right? But I think in general, like if you have a great idea, you've battle tested it, you've got some seed funding, and you can take a little bit of risk where you don't have a huge salary, say for 6 months or a year, then I think you should go after it, because the thing that I have learned is that it is always great to work for somebody else because you have that security, but it's even better to work for yourself because there's nobody that knows yourself better than you, and you know what you can do and you know what you can't do, and if you could be honest about that and get people around you that compliment you, and you have something that can differentiate in the market, something that has been battle tested, you're going to be successful. But maybe you're not going to build a unicorn, but you don't have to. Like if you build 10 million in value, 50 million in value, then you're going to make a great life for yourself.
Right. By the way, congratulations to your wife. She sounds like a very smart woman.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was
Especially after you get married, I think most people would have been like, "Honey, we have bills to pay."
Well, she's really supportive. She's in the business world too, so she's been in kind of UX and UI for kind of 20 years. Samsung, Sony, BSkyB in the UK, and so she helps me think about things from a different perspective. And so she helped me design out the original product for Officium. She's like, well, pretend I'm a buyer. How are you selling this to me? And how are you designing the experience and the pitch to me to what it's used for, right? And so she actually helped me design it out. So she's been a big supporter, obviously, but a big part of our success.
How do you guys, so especially when you're a designer, how do you guys, I'm assuming you guys iterate like probably 1,000 times. How do you calculate that? Like conversions, and how do you need to change? Because first design, I'm assuming it's not going to be the one that you keep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I always say is come up with a triangle, or what I like to call the trifecta revenue opportunity. And, and so when we did it, like consulting was the first one, BPO frontline services was the second one, and technology referrals or partnerships were the third. Because if, when we first started consulting, it was really successful. It's still successful, but it was really successful in the beginning. And that's why we became so profitable. But as like the pandemic hit, then people were like, hey, do you do frontline services? Can you help us do on-demand, customer service and so forth? And so because we had already built a bench of capability there, we just kind of pivoted and being able to do that. And they're like, well, actually, this is awesome, but do you do technology and BP? And we're like, yeah, of course we do. And so we'd already signed up some partners to help us do AI and do tech stuff and things of that nature. Or if we weren't in a geography that needed services, we white labeled, for them. And so I say, like, for us in services, I created that trifecta. And it's been good for us because as the macroeconomic shifts, then you can shift. And so what I would say is be careful not to like tie yourself to just one way of doing your business. Think about 2 or 3 different ways and just iterate on those 2 or 3 different ways. I don't think you should boil the ocean. Be careful that you don't you don't want to distract yourself. But I think it's fine for us, for our founder, to come up with 2 or 3 different ways and then try them out and see which one is most successful, and be comfortable pivoting every so often as you need to, and make sure you hire a team that can be comfortable pivoting to a different offering or a different product. You'll find for lack of a better term, your cash cow, as it were, and that'll be really beneficial. But always keep other options open for you so that you can have ancillary revenue streams.
Talk to me about raising money. I'm assuming you guys raise money, but there's need to be a decision that made in a company. Do we need to raise money or do we go bootstrap? How do you make that decision?
I mean, our initial funding was like $150,000 loan, which in my naivety, I thought that was a lot of money. But what we found is that was fine for us for the first 2 years. And then we hit a point of scale. So we made 10 million in the first 2 years. But we found that like, hey, if we want to go from making 10 million in the first 2 years to like making 100 million, the amount of liquidity that you need to do that is about 5 to 10x of what we had. And so we said we could continue to grow like marginally, like 5, 10, 20, 30% a year, or we could go out and we could get some cash or be acquired to be able to take this, what we think is a really great, idea and concept and blow it out, right? And so that's what made the decision for us, is because we couldn't bootstrap and grow 10x. There's a tension there, right? And so we were able to have the conversation as a board, and we said, okay, let's go do VC pitches. Let's go look at loan options. Let's go look at acquisition options.
So at what point did you guys actually got the loan for 150? Is this before?
It was in the beginning. That was our original seed.
Right on the beginning. Okay.
Yeah, it was our
before
original
you even
seed.
had any kind of product.
That's right. Yeah. So like I said, Kevin.
And then that took 2 years, and then you made it to 10 million. You said.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's a dream world scenario. First of all, congratulations on that one.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I mean, a lot of things just kind of fell into place, for us. So, like I said, it's not always the right time. My first startup, not so much, right? And what is it? 1 in 5 startups don't make it past the 5th year. And so, like we're
once
really
you guys got to 10 million evaluation, then you said, okay, this is the time to go to VC and raise some money.
That's right. Well, once we made 10 million, our valuation was a little higher, right. But once we made 10 million, we said, hey, like if we want to scale, like if we want to become 50 million, 100 million. And so then I put together a pitch deck, and, we pitched, to a bunch of VCs. We pitched to a bunch of banks, at the time. And then out of the woodwork, we had 3 companies that wanted to acquire us. And so we looked across all the options, and we felt Arise was the best option for us. They had a platform, which is amazing. It's a global platform for on-demand workers. It's kind of similar to the AWS platform, but for human capital versus, for servers and cloud and so forth. And so we're like, hey, we need that platform. They've been in business for 30 years. They had credibility and reputation, and they were interested we're in gaming, we're in consulting. They didn't have those domain verticals in their business. And they also had sales and marketing and a bunch of other, areas that we didn't have. And so we're like, hey, this is fantastic. The cultures were similar. The core values were similar. And so we think this is it. So let's do it. And, it took a little while to go through due diligence, as any startup, acquisition goes through. But we've been with them for 15 months now. So we're really happy with, especially you look at the macroeconomics of what's happening right now. It's a really smart decision for us to do that 15 months ago, because we would be making different business decisions if we were still a startup. And so it's been a really good match for us.
How would they evaluate a company? I mean, I always thought this is a conflict of interest, especially when you're raising money from VCs and they're evaluating your company. That's, I know it's their money and they're investing in it. So that's why they're evaluating it. But I always thought it was a conflict of interest, because the founder wants a high valuation, the investor wants a low evaluation. Always, 100% of the time.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a negotiation. I mean, I think generally the industry has some pretty good norms for evaluation now. So we were a services company, and so for a service company, it's usually 8 to 12x of EBITDA is kind of what the normal valuation is for a services company. If you're a SaaS company, it's usually 2.5, 3x of revenue, right? Sometimes 4x because of the IP and so forth. And so it depends on kind of what kind of startup you are, but there's some well-defined, norms on valuation. So even though the VC or the acquirer wants to get the best deal, they also know that like the founders know what the standard and the norms are. And we hired a really good law firm that would represent us and make sure that everything was fair and equitable and so forth, and go to bat for us. And so, yeah, conflict of interest potentially, but at the end of the day, the norms are so established now. I think it's difficult. If you're a founder and you're doing your homework, it's difficult for you to be lowballed and accept it, because unless you have other extenuating circumstance where you need the cash, generally I think there's always going to be that middle ground.
Where do you think 2023 is going as far as service industry, startups?
Yeah, I think it's going to be.
Is this even a good time if somebody wants to raise funds right now? Is this a good time?
It's a hard time. It's a hard time to raise money. I was looking at some gaming VC numbers. In roughly 96% less money has been raised this year for gaming, metaverse, blockchain VCs. You're looking at 5% new startups of what was happening 2 years ago. 5% of like.
Is it just US or are you using international?
No, it's global. And so right now it's a really tough time, mostly because there's so much instability in the market. And so and obviously Silicon Valley Bank and everything that happened with that causes more instability in the market and probably more perceived fear than actual fear that exists. And so it's a hard time. You do see people raising money and you see some people getting big checks. And so it's still happening, right? VC firms aren't just closing their wallet. They realize that they have to think strategically. And a lot of VC firms are in for the 10 to 20 year game. They're not in for the 6 to 12 month game. So there's still a lot of VC firms that are raising money. But on the services side specifically, much harder, because it's much more difficult to start a services company in this type of environment, than the environment 2 or 3 years ago when everything changed with the pandemic, and all of a sudden you had this spike of revenue across these not new industries, but established industries like gaming and so forth. You saw decrement in revenue in other ones. And so your service industries could come in and take advantage of that spike. But now, companies are being tighter, and it's just harder to convince companies to give money to services startups. Now, if they're already well established and they need funding to kind of weather the storm, I think that's definitely happening.
Do you think it's a good idea to focus on one idea, or should you try out 3-4 different ideas and see which one gets traction?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my trifecta comment earlier. I think you should have at least 3 ideas. You can lean on one that you think is the best, but you should have three different ideas in the early days until you fine tune the exact thing that's going to resonate best with the market. I think you got to be careful tying yourself to kind of one horse as it is.
Startups are hard.
Definitely. And I got to tell you, I love being a founder, but being responsible for hundreds of people and their livelihoods, and knowing that in the early days, obviously not in the later days when we were acquired, but in the early days, knowing that are we going to make payroll? Those are things you never tell people in the company. But as a founder, you kind of carry that, and you're this company hasn't paid us for 3 months. How are we going to get them to pay us so we can make payroll? And how do we get a line of credit? Oh, you can't get a line of credit because you're a startup under 2 years and you don't have credibility and blah, 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 right? So I think in the early days, there's definitely a lot of stresses, to a startup. And not only that, is am I going to make revenue? I've got a really good friend of mine. She's really talented, and she's been pitching her startup idea for 3 years. And it's just really hard sometimes. Sometimes it's great ideas have to be exactly at the right time or they don't work.
Is there such thing as, this is a great idea?
I think so. Maybe I'm biased because I think I came up with
Because to me, idea. It's there's no single idea that hasn't been tried out. There's not one single idea. Every single idea that's been tried out.
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily has somebody thought of this great idea before. It's that next step, which is has somebody thought of the great idea and been able to implement that great idea. And people can think of great ideas all the time. I probably have hundreds of great ideas great ideas that come into my head.
Right.
But, do I implement? Do I execute on those great ideas? And that's the hard part. It's not hard coming up with great ideas. I mean, you could talk to 100 people. There's a lot of smart people in the world, right? And they have great creative ideas. But then how do you create a business model, implement it, and execute it? That's what's really hard. And I think that's what I mean when I say great ideas. It's like taking that great idea to maturation.
What's the percentage of, you think, successful versus failing startups?
20%.
20% successful?
Yeah, 20%. Yeah, I mean, not based off of my number. There's a study that was done that I alluded to earlier, which is 1 in 5 startups are successful after 5 years.
Have they done any studies? What's the difference between a successful startup and a failing startup? Like, is it the entrepreneur? Is it the funding? Is it the timing?
Well, I think you're answering the question, so I don't need to answer it.
So all those.
Yeah, it's all those things. I also think it's the environment too. Like I couldn't start Officium today. I wouldn't be successful because the environment isn't right for it. The environment was right for Officium, 2.5, 3 years ago.
So the timing.
Yeah. So the timing. Yeah. So the environment builds into the timing.
That's interesting. How you can't really measure that. Like, how do you measure what time to start something?
You can't.
It's just the luck, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is that kind of montage. Hard work leads to luck, but at the end of the day, like if you've done your research and you feel like it's a battle tested idea, then perhaps the timing is right. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if you've done everything you can do, then you just go for it. But if you battle test it and it doesn't seem like a good idea and you still try to do a startup, well, that's not very smart. You have to. I mean, I gave up on my first startup. You have to at some point. I mean, this is my viewpoint, and I don't want to discourage anybody like listening and all of a sudden they're going to kill their startup after this. But I think at some point you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to say, hey, do I see success in the near future? Have I had success in the past? And you have to say, hey, maybe it's just the wrong time, and you don't necessarily have to give up on it, but maybe you put it on the back burner. And you say, it's just not the right time. People aren't interested in this because you can only, I've learned this a long time. You can't sell anything to anybody that they don't already want to buy. Because that's always been my thing is I'm not a salesperson. I'm a value person. So I'm going to share something with you. If you find it valuable, you'll be like, hey, I want to buy that. But if you don't find it valuable, no matter how hard I try to sell it, it's not going to change the fact that you're going to say no. And so that's why I think you got to be honest with yourself and say, hey, is the value that I'm trying to create, is the market receptive? And if the market isn't receptive, at some point you have to say, okay, I tried, I'm going to put it on the back burner and I'm going to wait for the market to be ready, or I'm going to try something else, or I'm going to go back to, like a full-time job until, I have the capability to try this again. Right.
Where do you see the VC money is going to these days? I know AI is a pretty big one. Everybody's putting money on that.
And there's a lot of VC money
like
still
my
in
neighbor
gaming.
and his mother is getting into AI now.
Yeah.
It's like there's AI company on every single corner.
It's true. Now, so gaming, AI, blockchain, healthcare, especially as it relates to technology. I mean, you're seeing a lot of kind of investments in those types of areas. Obviously, there's always investments in technology, SaaS, and that kind of stuff. What's the next SaaS thing? But I mean, if I were to, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if I were to be a betting person, I bet an enormous amount of money is being put into AI right now, mostly because you'll be able to get a pretty good return on investment in AI in the next 5 to 10 years.
No.
Like I think
and
a
some
great
of these
use
companies,
case
to be honest, they're not actually AI. It's just the API acting as an AI.
Yeah, but you know that, but consumers don't know that.
Right.
So if you get consumers, let's say this company goes public, they're like, we're an AI company, where actually they're just an API connector. Consumers don't know that. Consumers are like, oh, that looks pretty cool. Somebody else invested in that. So I think it's part of it. It's like when you build a company, some companies use kind of the sexy words, like AI is a sexy word right now. And in some cases, they're simplified AI, like an API. In some places, they're really complex AI, like Chat GPT. I mean, we're all talking about Chat GPT now, but the reality is it's been around for a long time, right? It was invested in years and years ago, and now it's like, boom, the market's ready for it. Everybody's excited about it. Google's trying to catch up. Everybody's trying to catch up with it because all of a sudden it hit the market and it went gangbusters, right? It's just like the iPhone. The iPhone didn't like all of a sudden just hit the market. It's like they had been planning that for quite some time in development. And so I think there's a lot of companies thinking about, okay, not only like what's the next Chat GPT, but what's the next thing that's even better than that, and they're investing in that right now.
Where do you think the ChatGPT is going? I mean, people are saying it's a Google killer, which I don't see how that's going to go.
I mean, I think the way that I look at AI is I think that there's always going to be like a hybrid experience. There's going to be the human and there's going to be technology, right? And in some cases, maybe technology can replace the human in some of the repeatable RPA processes and like warehouses. I mean, we already see this in other places. But like when you and I are chatting, like there's some things that you and I, even over this video, that will be able to communicate and understand tangibly that a computer never will be able to, regardless of like, at least not for 100 years. And so I think that what companies are going to do is they're going to look at their entire engagement experience with their customers, and they're going to identify like, which part of this can I leverage to speed up the response time, speed up accuracy, and then increase the amount of complex conversations that happens with humans so that those could be more valuable conversations, right? So I think that's how companies are going to be thinking about it. I also think that there's going to be a lot of startups that spin out. I mean, there's going to be a startup that uses Chat GPT that writes content creation for 100 companies, right? They're going to tap. I mean, it's going to happen, right? They're going to be like, hey, I spent, whatever on Chat GPT. I've thrown all this data in. I've trained Chat GPT, and now I do content creation for 100 companies, and now I'm $1 billion company. That's going to happen, right? Full stop. I don't know who the company's going to be, but somebody's going to do that. But that's a little bit different than like how is an existing company going to use Chat GPT. Does that make sense?
We're almost in the middle, like anyone believing. The series going super fast.
Yeah, I mean,
where do you think you guys will be like in another couple of years?
Well, I mean, I think today we're a small fish in a big pond, and so I think we're not going to be a whale in 2 years, but we're going to be a much bigger fish. And what we do is so different in the gaming space and the consulting space. Like just as an example, like we're one of the only companies out there that do game testing, localization, player support, content moderation, community for gaming companies. We're also one of the only BPOs that support blockchain companies. And then in consulting, we're one of the few consulting firms in the world that can prove profitability through your customer service experience. And so I see that a lot of people are going to be attracted to that. And so we're going to continue to grow and drive that value and grow the team and continue to drive that thought leadership. I'm just a big believer, like whatever we do, it has to be valuable for the market. It has to be valuable for the buyer. Otherwise, we shouldn't do it, And I also think that something that's changing in the market, which I'm glad that we're spearheading, is because we have all of these services, you find companies that because they want to make money, they don't actually help their clients make the smartest decisions. They make the decisions that will help them make more money. Whereas we look at ourselves as a trusted advisor, and sometimes we advise our clients that actually you shouldn't do that. Because even though that would make us $1 million more, that's not good for your customers and that's not good for you. And so that builds trust. That people do business with people, right? That builds trust with that buyer. So when something hits the fan in the future, they'll be like, hey, I trust Jonathan because he helped me with this challenge in the past. And I know that he's going to give me objective feedback that isn't necessarily going to benefit him or his company. And so I think that a lot of companies are going to be thinking about that, whether it's people over profits, purpose over profits, value over profits, whatever phrase you want to use. I think that mentality is changing, and we're just thrilled to kind of spearhead that.
Talk to me a little bit about the dark side of technology. For example, there's a huge scam going on right now, especially with international companies calling U.S. citizens, and next day their money is gone from the bank.
Yeah.
As the technology progresses, on the other side of the coin is the dark side of the technology also progresses with that. How do we fight that?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I think one, you, as a human, you just have to be smarter. Like, you have to know that, like, if it seems to be too good to be true, it is. If it seems to be like crazy urgent, it's probably a scam. Especially if you don't know the person. Like, you have to, like, put your guard up, and you have to say, hey, we know as the world grows and expands and technology expands, I need to be smarter as a human being, not to click on that link, not to give my account information, not to, say, oh, you need $1,000. Oh, that's my best friend. And, those types of things. You just have to be smarter. And I think that as humans get more educated and they're more thoughtful, I think that's one piece. I think the second piece is these hackers are just really intelligent. I don't know how smart you are, but they're smarter than me. And so they can really think about, well, what's that thing that in 10 years is going to come out, so I can start building a solution to hack and steal and so forth. And so these technology companies or themselves have to figure out what are the protection mechanisms, or the security companies, the startups or the security companies that are out there, they have to say, okay, what's coming out in 20 years? They have to even think further than the hackers. And then how do I build a solution? So that's part of it. And then I think the second part is immediately when like an issue happens, it's important how you react and how you respond to that, like how quickly you respond to that. I think that's the other piece, because it's going to be impossible for me, you, the smartest minds in these technologies companies to predict everything that a hacker can do or will do. But how you react to it, respond to it, and come up with a solution in a very quick time frame is going to be super critical as well. But there's always, in everything we do in life, all the way back to the beginning of time, there's always dark people, right? So there's always going to be dark people in the future. So you can't eliminate that, but you can protect yourself, put up walls, put up mechanisms personally, or, at the enterprise or startup level, security to prevent that.
Yeah, for some reason, I'm not really trusting the government to resolve any solution, bring any solutions anytime soon to us.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, but I also
anytime the government get involved, the problem gets worse. It's always like that.
I don't always disagree with you, but I think it was a number of governments that shut down, like the Silk Road and those types of things, which were really taking advantage of people and were doing dishonest things. And I mean, those are things that we publicly see. I'm sure there's things that we privately don't see, that gets taken down.
That's the thing that I think shutting down Silk Road made the problem worse. It didn't make the problem easy, by the way. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Right? If you had Silk Road today, you knew who the bad actors were. You know exactly who this is. You shut down the Silk Road. Now you have no idea where these people are.
Yeah. Where are they at on the dark web?
So I don't know how smart that was to shut it down.
Yeah, fair point.
End of the year, next year, do you see anything new emerging other than AI, of course?
Well, I mean, I think right now the monies are staying where it's at, right? I mean, like, because the volatility of the different markets across the world, so there's not as much movement in money as there usually is. Obviously.
How long do you think that's going to stay like that?
I mean, from my perspective, the war in Ukraine needs to end for like a lot of instability to recover, because like the supply chain and a bunch of other things are being really impacted, by that war. I mean, it's not just the war in Ukraine, but that's a component of it. I think another piece is I'm never a big proponent that the U.S. dollar should be weaker than it is, but the strength of the U.S. dollar is really causing catastrophe in Europe and in Asia, because a lot of companies hold assets in Europe and Asia. And because the U.S. dollar is so strong, until those companies can adapt to that change, whether they move money back into the U.S. dollar or whether the U.S. dollar, kind of equalizes itself back to what it used to be, like they're down 20-30% revenue, the tech companies and other companies, right? So I think until that solution, gets solved, I think this little bump in the road with Silicon Valley Bank, that's going to have to be sorted and everyone's going to have to have confidence in the future bank, because really the value of money is based off what people think it is. So there has to be confidence in that, confidence in the supply chain, confidence in that inflation is going to be stemmed and adjusted, and the fiscal policies that are being set by the government aren't going to exacerbate inflation, which there's a lot of well-meaning fiscal policies that were done during the pandemic, which just flooded the market with money. And so we just have to, like, those three things, I think, are what do those look like in 6 months? And I think that's probably going to be an indication of like how volatile the market is and how money starts moving around again. I mean, I have friends, this is a consumer point of view, not an enterprise point of view, but I have friends that are just not spending. They were spending last year, but they're not spending. Consumers are still spending, but they're not spending at the amount that they were spending a couple of years ago, right? And you probably know, like,
I think they were spending in the beginning of the year. Now they're kind of slowing down.
Yeah,
because everybody's getting kind of afraid. So
yeah, and they're spending on different things, right? They might have been spending on TVs last year, and now they're spending on food, right? Because food has got so I'm serious. Like, eggs are like $8.50 a dozen. Milk is like $9 a gallon, like where I live in California. And so, I mean, gas has gone down. Everybody thinks gas is the barometer, but gas is like stabilized. But everything else is like, not everything else, but a lot of goods and even services are starting to really escalate their prices. And so, there just has to be more confidence in the global economy for things to stabilize. And then companies have to, they have to match some level of this inflation, or you're never going to be able to retain the talent too. And I think that's a problem too.
How do you guys do that? Do you guys raise the prices for your customer usually?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always that component where you have that conversation with a strategic partner where you're like, hey, we got to open the books. We want you to be successful. We need to be successful. And maybe you raise the prices a little bit. Generally, what companies like mine tend to do is like, hey, let's look at technology. Let's look at different markets. Let's look at different opportunities and see how we can balance this out so we don't pass on all of the macroeconomic issues to our clients. So you have to be thoughtful about that as well. And as well as taking care of the people or the workers in your network. You have to be, companies that are pragmatic like that are successful. Companies that just say, hey, we're just going to start paying people less so that we can deal with, the EBITDA problem. That's when you like get into a spiral. And I never recommend that.
Do you guys usually look at the inflation and then look at the people in your company and go, we might have to, give raises here and there? How do you deal with that problem?
Yeah, yearly, you've got to look at, it's a constant struggle for companies to say like, hey, we want to keep the best talent and we want to make sure we're paying market value. But when the market value raises because of inflation, then you have to adjust if you want to keep that top tier talent, right? And so that's something that every company has to do on a yearly basis throughout the year. And if you want to keep that top talent, companies that jump over dimes to get to pennies, and that means they want to save money, so they start hiring C players instead of A players. Eventually, that's going to be the undoing of their company.
Talk to me a little bit about your decision to sell the company. How do you come up to that decision? At what point do you say, okay, it's time to sell it?
I mean, for us, my co-founder and I were looking at the future, and we just looked for what's the best decision for our shareholders, for our people, for the ability for us to scale the business, and for what we think is probably coming down the pipe from a macroeconomic standpoint. So we looked at all those things, and that's how we made the decision.
Obviously, you're happy with your decision.
It was a good decision. Yeah, I think it was a good decision.
Because you have 3 exits, or is it 2?
No, two exits.
2 exits, all right.
Well, who knows? In 10 years, we might talk again, and you might be, Jonathan, tell me about your favorite.
We make 10.
Yeah. Who knows what the future holds? I don't know.
Hi, I'm Kris Kalum. If you guys like this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button.